Greetings and welcome back to another discussion on my channel. Today I have the esteemed and sehr geehrten Herr Physiker, Red Pill Germany, with me. And we're going to be covering a topic that I think, to my knowledge and to date, has not been sufficiently covered, really by any stretch of the imagination on any channel on YouTube. Now, I'm not going to engage in needless self-praise for this. I'm just saying I think it's a potentially interesting topic. And the topic at hand, gentlemen, as we say, is physics and the public. Now, physics as a discipline has been and remains very much arcane, abstract, and far removed. Suffice to say, nobody gives a shit when some astrophysicist or some physicist makes some new discovery, particularly astrophysicists, who cares, far off star. And that has historically been the case for the majority of what we know or could call the history of physics. And things changed dramatically, obviously, in the 20th century for fairly obvious reasons as well. Atomic energy, nuclear weapons, and what have you. And I think one thread as we embark upon this discussion that we will see this continuous is that when it comes to the sciences, people only give a shit about the science that directly affects them, which means it doesn't matter how well understood supernovas might be, some new level of understanding, because although it's possible some descendant species of ours might be affected by something along those lines, I mean, nobody cares. But of course, if they're next on the line, they do care. So why biology is, quote unquote, so much more interesting to people. Well, today we are going to dispense with that and talk about physics and its relationship with the public, but also sort of the history. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not a physicist like you, esteemed and great physicist.
Come
but
on.
well, I've always had the deepest respect for physicists. It's like you guys are kind of like the wizards of reality, you know? I mean, every other science in the world is based upon physics. I mean, you don't have biology without chemistry, and you don't have chemistry without physics. So in a sense, it's unavoidable. I mean, you need to have some basic basic knowledge of physics. However, so that wizards of reality, that's what I call you guys. When I look at the history of physics, my minimal knowledge, looking back to some of the ancient Greeks who, guys like Democritus and I think Leucippus in the 5th century came up with some sort of rudimentary atomic theory. I mean, this really was far out and nobody gave a shit. But even well into the present, I mean, once again, when we see the first, I guess, inkling of interest in the realm of physics, it's astrophysics or astronomy, in the 16th and 17th centuries with Copernicus and Galileo. And this was all because of the Catholic Church and for political reasons, basically, not because people had an interest in this stuff. And even the battles between Leibniz and Newton were just private. No, I mean, I can't really think, when I think about the history of physics, any public interest or engagement until the stakes are really high during World War II, basically. I mean, I don't know if you would agree with that or disagree.
I think I would agree. So first of all, let me say thanks for having me on your channel again. Great pleasure, great honor as always. And you should really tone down your flattery, because you know maybe that all physicists are very susceptible to this kind of flattery.
It's true, but you guys are the wizards of reality.
That are so big, you really don't have to inflate them even more. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's bad, very bad. Okay, so I would agree with that. There have been, of course, many other practical applications much before that. but that was more technology and engineering, I would say. It wasn't really physics yet.
Which
So
once again is based on physics, though.
it is based on it, but it is not the same thing. So and this is just my perspective, but the way I see it is that the science of physics really and technology and technical applications were totally separate from each other until very late, actually. So if you look at Archimedes, for example, that was a good example. He was very practical. He built, for example, devices by which you could defend a city. That was practical, and he was also what I would say a natural philosopher. So the archetype or the archaic scientist kind of. But then later on, what became important, for example, is making metals out of ore, and that is a precursor of chemistry. Many people think that chemistry came from these people who tried, these alchemists who tried to make gold from lead and stuff. But in reality, I would say the early form of chemistry was more, how do I get iron and steel, and stuff like that.
And a lot of these guys didn't even know they were effectively chemists. I mean, you look at the
they just did what worked.
The science of swordsmithing. I mean, it was kind of like know-how and knowledge without the. It was like know-how without the knowledge. It was like, okay, my father or my grandfather figured this out, and I mean, you look at something like Damascus steel, or during the Middle Ages, or also Toledo steel in Spain. These guys weren't. I mean, there's some deep chemical questions involved in forging a blade like that, but they just sort of figured out a formula like, oh, this works. They taught their sons, and that was kind of the rest is history. So that didn't. Incidentally, for those who don't know, Archimedes, for all his greatness, to my best of my knowledge, he was actually killed by the king of Sicily, but don't misquote me on that.
Yeah, I think he helped with the defense of Syracuse, but
then I don't know. I think
Archimedes fire wasn't that a thing? Anyway, but what I found also very interesting is that for a long time people thought that cold would be a thing, kind of, right? A substance, or heat would be a substance or something, right? And I think from the boring of cannons, people could actually derive some thermodynamic principles. So it was a military application, actually. You make a cannon by drilling, basically, and that heats up, of course. And the observations they made during that process, which was just a technical process, were then used in order to formulate basic principles. So in many ways, I think that the technological application was there first, and then from these observations people formed then these abstract ideas. So nowadays this goes in both directions. You have a lot of times you have the case that theory predicts something, and then some experimentalist thinks about how could I build an experiment that could observe this effect, and then they build it, and then they observe it. Very good examples for gravitational waves, for example, which have been discovered recently, which have been long ago predicted. But it was very hard to measure, and then they built a very, very costly, very precise laser interferometer, and they really then can measure gravitational waves from a supernova explosion, I think. So that's a good example of when you once you know the abstract principles, you can make predictions then, and in the lab you can then actually measure that. But
that actually, Red Pill raises an interesting question. Now that I think about it, we know that in the life sciences, the biological sciences, there are a lot of restrictions in trying to get research grants based on political correctness and what have you. I don't, obviously I'm not a physicist, but I would imagine it's kind of almost like the opposite, or at least very different, in the sense that it's not the people are overly concerned about the discovery of gravitational waves. It's like they're probably just thinking to themselves, why on earth would we care? Why should we fund this kind of thing? The particle accelerator in Switzerland, for example. I mean, I think it's great, but I mean, why would the average person? I think this is another element of a kind of interest, or rather lack of interest, the public has for physics. Now, you could argue that an understanding of physics and has brought us virtually all the comforts we have today. The fact that you and I are communicating via these pieces of metal and foam.
Oh yeah.
It's a wonder of physics, and I think people don't have enough gratitude, if you will, towards physics and physicists. Another element I'd like to touch is this, I think, absurd, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this trend that's been going on for the better part of a decade now of lay people with no understanding of quantum theory talking about quantum theory and using it to justify and explain all manner of crazy shit that they just have no clue about. But that's another interaction of the public with physics. Now, when World War II broke out, the advancements of Einstein, obviously, I guess, were pretty, or Einstein, sorry, prominent. This really just changed the dimension of physics completely. In fact, after the first bomb had gone off in Japan, Oppenheimer, Robert Oppenheimer, an American, the physicist, talk about ego. He says, I am become death. I am, like this, he's quoting Shiva, I think. Never before in the history of mankind had we seen that destructive power, or since, at least actively. And people became very concerned. And in fact, I've seen discussions in Germany in the 1970s and 80s, and all of these great physicists of the past, I would love to be able to pick their brains. People like Edward Teller, and all these guys who are dead now. Von Neumann's another one. They're all dead, but man, that was a great time to just be never mind. But
so these are a lot of points at once now.
yeah. Well, let's try to incorporate it into something. But it seemed like for decades on end, and in no small part due to the existence of the Cold War, people had a profound interest in not atomic theory per se, or Atomphysik per se, but in the physics and the consequences of the physics involved in that. Now it's debatable, whether or not the United States should have dropped the bombs or not. That's a separate historical question. But certainly it showed that physicists are the wizards of the world. To create a sort of analogy, Dungeons and Dragons analogy, they created the biggest fireballs any wizard had ever made.
Yeah, that is true. So
please.
I maybe want to comment on the first point. So you
Sure.
said, why should people care about gravitational waves and these fundamental questions, or like CERN in Switzerland? So there are very different kinds of departments and very different kinds of funding in science. So a lot of the funding is from the industry, and there are smaller grants for applied stuff. And so there are these different stages of science, I would say. There are engineers, then there are applied physicists, and then there are experimentalists who work on the very basic questions, and theoreticians also. And then there are these gigantic research institutions that really tackle the hard fundamental questions. And I think all of them have their justification. We need people who apply stuff in here and now, who solve some problems here and now, or who give innovation for new products for the industry. That is all nice and well. But we also need to think about the future, and there is also a basic interest in understanding the universe. And I think a certain percentage, at least, of the funding, and it is not most of the funding, in my experience, is really going into these more philosophical, fundamental questions. And I think all these things can exist at the same time, and maybe we can make some adjustments in what period or at what place we want to give a little more money to this and a little more money to that. But a lot of people try to see it black and white, and they want to play out one side against the other and say, oh, we want new innovative products, but at the same time I hate these physicists who take our tax money to do their far removed ivory tower studies. I think Stefan Molyneux is one of those guys. I mean, he talks about Western civilization and excellence and STEM and mathematics and all that stuff, but at the same time he says he hates those evil physicists who take his hard-earned tax dollars. I mean, yeah, I mean, we spend tax money on a lot of other useless shit, and I think CERN is probably the very least of our concerns. And then there are also other people. I know a lot of Christians, for example, who say, how can we just give $1 to a space program when there are still people starving in the world, for example? Also, something you can understand.
You don't need to be a Christian for that, right?
Oh yeah.
Social justice warrior.
In that case, it was a Christian monk who said that, but the sentiment is, I can understand where they're coming from. People are more important than science experiments, of course. But the thing is, when you feed people,
I think that's debatable.
Yeah, that is debatable. Yes, because when you feed people, they just make more people, and the problem will never go away.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be making a video about that separate topic. But anyway, yeah.
But what if we think like that? You know, if we never invest in understanding the universe better, then we never get anywhere. That's at least my point of view. So that's this problem, yeah. And a lot of funding in the US when I was there was actually very applied. So I was there in the Bush era, and everything was about detecting explosives and stuff like that, and national security. And now under Obama, then later, not now but later, it was more about green energy. Everything had to be green energy, and these are practical issues, and the politicians, they try to use physicists in order to solve their problems or in order to make them look good. Look, we're doing something. Yeah, it's like they can tell the voters, oh look, we invested money for green energy to make the environment healthy again or something. Huh? So you just give the scientists some money and you can say, yeah, we did something. But these basic fundamental problems, they also need funding. I think CERN also needs funding. Gravitational waves, it's also important, and it's more these the European Union actually, but also other governments, of course. They invest in these international research facilities, and they have a long-term goal. So these are not short-term objectives. This is not, yeah, it's also politics, maybe some propaganda effort, like the moon landing, for example. Some motivations like these might also play a role, but so I would say both of these or all of these different branches or stages or levels of science, the applied to the very fundamental, they all have their justification and play their role. So I guess your next point was that the people who talk about quantum mechanics who don't understand too much about it, yeah, so this is actually a joke among us physicists also. This sometimes during the lunch break we searched for some fraud websites or from esoteric websites on the internet where people would advertise esoteric methods of healing or physical therapy with quantum mechanics. Like I think the best thing I ever found was quantum angel healing. Yeah? So the idea is that angels are beings of light, and photons are quanta of the electromagnetic field, so light particles, quote unquote, and that is why quantum angel healing is a thing now. And if you can find some communication channel with those angelic creatures, then they can heal all sorts of ailments. Yeah. So that's,
I mean, there's actually a real engagement between, I think it was in the late 90s, there was a professor of mathematics and physics at New York University, a guy named Alan Sokal, or Sokal in German. And he actually created this paper. It was just mumbo jumbo. It was just Kauderwelsch.
Yeah.
And he submitted it to some literature, like high fancy blah 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 literary journal, about the implications of relativity theory, and it was just a bunch of nonsense. And they thought it was great. And then he later revealed that it was just Forschung. He was just making fun of them.
He was just trolling them.
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, that has happened. And, there are people like Deepak Chopra who spend an inordinate amount of time talking about like the power of quantum something. My impression is that one thing I hear a lot, and this is much more of a sort of physical, like a scientific issue, but like quantum uncertainty. And when we get into the debate about like free will and things, things like that, I've seen so many people try to invalidate the basic principle of cause and effect, which is the guiding principle of the universe, by saying, well, quantum uncertainty.
Yeah, this was my next point, and this is the most important point, I think, because people somehow they are triggered by some words they hear. They hear one word, and then they have their own ideas and opinions, and they don't listen to the rest anymore. They heard that one word, and that triggers them to believe something. And in case of quantum mechanics, that is uncertainty, and that is probability. So that we don't have precise trajectories anymore, like in Newtonian physics, for example, but in the realm of the quanta, basically. Our teacher always used to say we have like the realm of big stuff, like a big train or something, and then we have the particles like electrons. So
but let me ask you a question as a physicist.
Yeah.
Quantum theory, when properly understood, doesn't invalidate Newtonian physics in the sense that if you're an aeronautical engineer designing an airplane, you're not going to be, it's not fuck those 4 laws of the second law of we don't need to worry about that. Let's just look at quantum
precisely
theory.
So nothing that Newton said was wrong or was in any way, I mean, it was just especially with relativity, it was generalized. So what Newton said is true for small velocities, but if you approach the speed of light, you need to calculate with including relativity. And the same with quantum mechanics, like for example, particles have a wavelength, and they show also the effect of interference and coherence, for example. But this is true if you have the conditions so that you can observe these effects. But in normal everyday life, these effects are so small that you can't see them, or that we don't see them as such. For example, quantum mechanics makes a lot of statements about probabilities, and whether or not in a single incident outcome A or outcome B will manifest. That is up to probability. But in the statistical ensemble, however, these probabilities are deterministic. That means we know that 40% will be like that, and 60% will be like that.
I think
not 41, not 59, right. 40 and 60. And those probabilities, they are deterministic. And there is no, because a lot of these douchebags, it's actually moral relativism.
Probabilistic is deterministic. They're one and the same.
Exactly.
People have this notion like, if it's probably, maybe it won't happen. That's not what it means in science. Probabilistic is deterministic.
Yes. So all the statements that quantum mechanics make are absolutely precise, and it is just that you don't talk about trajectories anymore or velocities and positions, but you talk about probabilities or distributions, contributions to a state, stuff like that. But I think it's a lot of douchebags who just want to justify their relativism. Quantum mechanics, it teaches us that. I hear a lot of bullshit from people who have no idea about physics, and they just heard this word probability or uncertainty.
Yeah, I'm not even a physicist, and I can recognize this bullshit most of the time. And I also don't feel I would never go on my channel and make a video about quantum theory because I don't understand it nearly well enough to do that. But there's so many people that deign to do that. I've seen it in the comment section. Whenever I have a discussion about free will and cause and effect, inevitably, without fail, someone will bring up quantum theory as a counter. Well, unpredictable and da da da. I mean, I'm not normally one to say, show me your credentials, but I usually just assume when people talk about that, they don't have a clue, even if it sounds somewhat convincing. Just because when I actually talk to physicists, and I know one or two others, they're of the same opinion or view as you. I mean, it's part of this new ageism, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Incorporating mystical quantum theory. I've seen people, it is true that human consciousness or consciousness in general is mysterious in some sense, but what does quantum theory have to do with it? To the best of our knowledge, nothing. But they'll insert quantum theory in that too, and it's just it's kind of baffling. At the end of the day, it's a strange world we live in.
Yeah, on the other hand, I should say that quantum effects are very important, and they are actually vital to our very existence. If matter were not the way it is, like if electrons didn't have a spin, we wouldn't be here.
But I guess, Red Pill, what I'm saying is that people will take a statement like that and
they don't know the
some human agency to that. I mean, you have to be a complete moron to think we're in charge as animate matter composed of molecules and atoms and then consequently spinning electrons. I mean, we're not in charge of that. So
not of that, yeah. So it depends on what you understand by free will. So I also think that there is such a thing as free will, but that the choices that we have are limited. We of course
I've talked about this before.
The sensible choices are limited. You will not go to a bakery and buy 500 billion buns. Most people buy one loaf of bread and 4 buns, right? Because that's normal. Stupid example maybe, but a lot of this stuff where people think everything is deterministic is just caused by the fact that the reasonable alternatives that you have to something are so limited in reality. But that doesn't mean, I think, that free will doesn't in itself exist.
Well, really, I think this is complicated because we really have to then define what we mean by free will. I wouldn't having choice to me doesn't mean it does not correspond to free will. So having the option to eat Portuguese food or Bavarian food or
that's not a question at all, I think.
Well, my point is that these are options, and I've talked about this in very early videos of mine, where in a probabilistic system you could have A, B, C. You could also have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. These are all choices, but they're all within the framework of a probabilistic system. So neither of us, probabilistically speaking, could have ever been a professional basketball player, for example.
True.
However, maybe somebody else might have been if he had fulfilled the physiological prerequisites. But I don't really see where free will comes into this. I mean, choice, people confuse the two. Of course we have choices, but the choices are fit within a deterministic model that does in fact offer several variables. It's just that there aren't an unlimited number of variables.
Yeah.
And depending on the person involved, there will be restrictions on those variables.
Yeah. So, but a lot of people would understand that the absence of free will would mean that your trajectory in life is precisely determined by outside.
Well, no one smart would argue
from the beginning
that.
or something. And that I don't believe. But the choices, if we want to put it that way, that we have are limited. There are limited numbers of points in time when we have a significant choice to make, and the options that we have are always restricted by what is just available,
the environment, effectively,
and what is
as well
what
as
is
our
practical.
own luck in winning or not winning the genetic lottery.
Yeah.
I mean, but to call that free will, I don't know, because I'm using so in philosophy. This is not to be confused with political libertarianism. There's this term libertarian, which refers to, I guess you could call sort of a classical Christian notion of free will, where, God gave us free will, blah, 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 blah.
In terms of
That
sinning or not sinning, like
something
moral.
along those lines, but it's basically we're free agents.
Mm,
We don't somehow. I mean, this makes no sense scientifically. It makes no sense in a common sense way either. That we're somehow free of the external, our environment, and all these things. I mean, that we can make decisions and it's okay. And none of the evidence supports that. And so I think that's what people mean by free will, generally speaking, is actually this philosophical libertarian free will, where it's just sort of somehow we have this magical attribute called free will, and it exists independent of whether it's raining outside and or who our parents were and what city we were born in and all these things. I mean, choice, yeah, of course, there are many choices to be made depending on your circumstances, but that is not the circumstances themselves fall within that probabilistic or deterministic system that gives rise to choices, which is why some people will have opportunities other people won't, and vice versa. And to my mind, there's no room for a classical libertarian interpretation of free will in that. I mean, I think what bothers people about that is the same thing that bothers them about things like, I don't know, heritability of IQ, things that are relatively fixed. It takes away their sense of flexibility or their own ability to mold things. And I mean, these are really abstract concepts. It's not, I mean, even if you were to internalize that, oh my God, I don't have free will. You should try. People should try this. Try just lying in your bed all day. You're not going to do it. You're going to do stuff regardless.
yeah.
I don't really think the implications are quite as heavy as people think. But when people bring up qualia, I mean, lay people and all this other stuff, which is just mumbo jumbo, kaudervesh, I don't really. I just kind of stop listening. I just have no patience for it. Not because I'm a physicist, because I can recognize that they don't have a clue what they're talking about.
Yeah,
And
I
I'd
think
rather actually ask a proper
mm,
physicist.
yeah, I think it's important to bear in mind when we use those concepts and these terms, what we really understand by them. And I know it's boring when someone says, "Let's define our terms first," but I think a lot of hour-long discussions could be avoided if people just define precisely what they're talking
I
about.
agree. There are a lot of scientific terms that people like statistically significant. That
Yeah,
doesn't mean,
free will also is an example of such a
yeah,
thing
yeah,
where
that's
people have
terribly
different
explained.
understandings and they discuss for 2 hours, and one person has one image and the other one, and they don't notice it.
Well, yeah, that's actually an excellent point. And really, that point could be made for a lot of things. The beginning of a discussion, let's define what we mean by term X, and if we can agree to a definition, then we proceed.
Hmm.
But more often than not, as you know, yeah, that is not the case. There, I mean, but that's just the nature of the internet, I guess, arguing about things when it's not even clear.
Oh yeah.
But,
Yeah.
um,
But another point you made earlier, I also wanted to comment on that before we forget about that, and that was when science actually becomes important to the public, when the
yeah,
public takes an interest, and that is, um, if I can comment on that,
for sure.
I think that comes in two ways. I think one is kind of greed and euphoria. When they think that new possibilities are available to us now that weren't there before, and then they're really hyped about it. And then the progress cannot be fast enough. And the other thing is, of course, fear. What have these evil scientists done to us now? Or something in nature that
The
scientists
latter,
discover.
I would say, applies to the events of World War II and the aftermath, where that was a fear-based interest.
Yeah, but it was before that already. It is actually so. Yeah. Then it was really strong. But I'm a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, for example,
Mm.
and Lovecraft is. I think most of his stuff is inspired by his frustration with mathematics and by the fact that he was totally overwhelmed by relativity and modern physics. So this is why he always describes these demonic or of the old gods, these things
Mm.
as twisted geometries and stuff that's not really real, and that our mind cannot fathom, like something like pictures by Escher maybe, or something like that. But so he was really bad at mathematics, and he hated it as a student, and I think his worldview was just he really felt intimidated by the discoveries of modern science on a fundamental level. Not that some city was burned to the ground by an atomic blast, but just the implications for our worldview. He was completely overwhelmed, and this concept of the ancient gods and Cthulhu, or however you pronounce that, is so interesting, because it just means that we are really insignificant little pawns on a chessboard, and the gods just play with us, kind of. So this is this fundamental terror that is.
Well, that's what
described
physics
in
has taught
Lovecraft.
us in a lot of ways, our insignificance in the universe. I mean, biology has done that too, in the sense that evolution has taught us that we're just an animal that won the lottery, as it were, in some sense, the biological or evolutionary or cosmic lottery. But even in that, that's kind of small potatoes. And then when you think about the billions of stars and all the other galaxies out there, it can be quite humbling. I don't think people. I mean, on the other hand, people just naturally revert back to their daily routines. Even if you were to talk to a reasonably intelligent person and say, well, do you know how big the Andromeda galaxy is? And do you know this and do you know that? He might think about it for 5 minutes, and then he'll just get back to his daily life. And, and when I walk around my neighborhood, like when I was doing before we started the chat, and saw all the Muslims and with their 1,000 children in tow. Well, I mean, I don't really think
there are more stars in the galaxy than the Turks have kids.
Yeah, they don't care about stuff like that. I mean,
I don't know.
You need to be a very special person, and I don't mean that in a negative way or really a special person. I mean, in I guess a special way, to really be concerned about things like, wow, the universe is so vast, and or the fact that this is something that you'll hear a lot from astronomers and astrophysicists. If we had been born in a different time, I believe it's the Andromeda galaxy wouldn't be visible anymore, because it would have been moved away from us, and it's just people. People can barely think in geological or evolutionary time frames, like 300,000 years, which is absolutely nothing. Because we didn't. I mean, once again, this is tied to evolution. I think the reason why you find so few physicists compared to other people, not just because it's hard. Well, that's the short answer. It's because essentially because of our evolved nature. I mean, everything about modern physics in particular, or even Newtonian physics for that matter, is maybe not entirely Newtonian. I mean, you could say Newtonian physics is sort of an expansion of some things that are common sense. But beyond that, I mean, there's nothing common sense moving forward from relativity theory to quantum theory and all this other stuff. It really takes as a human, you need to defy your own inclinations and tendencies to understand this stuff. Yeah. We didn't evolve that way. We evolved as apes, hunting gazelles and fighting each other.
Fun. I mean, this is why it's fun.
But this is why you're one of the chosen.
No. So the first thing I learned in physics is that there are no geniuses, or maybe very rarely successful physicists.
There are people who can do physics and people who can't. I cannot, and you can.
Physicists are just hardworking, stubborn people, and they do their work. They come to their workplace
who are capable of doing the work. I think every field requires an aptitude that.
But when you get to know them, they're really normal people, and they do their work like everyone else.
Hold on. I'm not saying that. I'm not. Hold on. I don't want to take this as an insult. I'm not saying that physicists aren't normal people. Obviously, they're not. They fuck and shit and eat like everyone else.
Exactly.
The point is, I'm making is more that not everyone can be a physicist, just like not everyone can be a basketball player. There's no way in hell, given my aptitudes, I could have ever done your job or gone into particle physics.
I think this NBA basketball is maybe a good example. I think your brain I mean, with all the training that you need to do a lot of hard work. It's really like training your muscles in the gym, right? Mathematics especially is a question of training. But of course, your brain or your character, whatever, you need to have an aptitude for
Yeah,
abstract thought, for
absolutely.
rational reasoning, stuff like that, and for the abstract. That is absolutely true. But beyond that, you need a lot of hard work in order to hone your skills and get all the knowledge and the relevant data together to perform. But what I wanted to say, what was that? That yeah, when physicists, we have these ideas, maybe, oh yeah, the Andromeda galaxy, and think about how insignificant and small we are. We have these ideas more often than other people, but also for us, I mean, we are lost sometimes in the routine of publishing papers and building lab experiments. So it becomes also kind of mundane, I think, yeah, from time to time.
Well, of course, everything does, but I just think this is something I always stress that not everyone can do anything they want, and physics requires a very specific skill set, aptitude, whatever
Yeah,
you want to call
yeah,
it. And in that sense, it's no different than being an athlete or really being anything.
mm,
Not everyone can be a physicist. I mean, I could never be a physicist because I just lack the mathematical aptitude. I guess in a similar sense to Lovecraft, although I'm
yeah,
not saying I'm on his
yeah.
level, but
Yeah, but this is why he wrote wonderful stories. Yeah. But the fun of
he
physics
had to
is
do
really, to
something.
me, that while it's true, it's so counterintuitive. A lot of the statements there are so counterintuitive. As you said, Newtonian physics can still be understood, of course, with like balls on a pool table or something like that. So common sense. But beyond that, a lot of things are counterintuitive, and we don't see it with our eyes. Yeah? We have our body has no senses to see that stuff. Either it's too small, or we really don't have any sensors to observe these things. So what the experimentalists do then, we basically build a lot of complicated devices to project these effects back onto our senses. So to make us see it somehow with some device and to make new sensors, yeah, new sensory organs basically that are filling an entire room maybe, but it allows us then to count single photons or to measure single electrons that tunnel through a tunneling junction, stuff that we can normally not see. Or think about the microscopes that people build, like scanning probe microscopy, for example, stuff like that, that brings stuff as pictures. Yeah, we can see nanometer-sized objects, yeah, on a picture now. Quite amazing. And in this realm, then there are a lot of effects happening, like the Casimir effect or stuff like that. Very counterintuitive, but you can clearly, with your intellect, you can understand precisely why it
But
happens.
you
Yeah,
can.
yeah,
But
but not a single person came up with that stuff. Yeah, I think studying physics for all those years is, the way I understand it, is just reassuring yourself without blindly believing stuff, reassuring yourself, calculating the things that men did in the past, so that you reassure yourself that they didn't do bullshit all those centuries back then, right? That the level of consensus now is actually true. And this is why students have to start from Newton and from the very beginning. Every physics student has to start at the beginning. We do not take for granted what the people before us did, but we all have to go through the derivations, through the basic experiments in our lab courses, so that each and every one has practical experience and has really guided by the professors basically, but has done all the important work for himself, either in the library or in the lab, so that we don't take it for granted. We kind of check that what they did is reasonable, and then when we're done, when we're 30 or something, then we can add. Then we can add a little bit. I think
you know,
when you're mining a deep tunnel, let me give this one picture at the end. When you're mining a deep tunnel and the tunnel is already 5 kilometers within the mountain, they haven't started yesterday, but 100 years ago. You first have to get to the point where the actual mining is taking place. So the studying of physics is you go into the mountain to the point where the mining actually is taking place, and then you can contribute to take away 10 centimeters of
Well, if I
solid
might
rock.
bring something up, this used to be the approach in the humanities too. You drew upon the classics and
the good old times. Yeah.
The good old times. I mean, there was a reason why these things were considered classics and greats. They've thrown all that away. I guess fortunately, you don't have that luxury in physics. You can't.
If we would do that, if we would shit all over what those great men did in the past, it would be nothing but sophistry. It would be a joke. Yeah. All our predictions
that's what the humanities
would be wrong.
Are right now. It's sophistry. So, yeah, that's pretty much what it's come down to. And I think a lot of that has to do with not paying attention. Yeah, as you pointed out, to the past, and very, very unfortunate. But
I really liked that video of yours, and even though I always had contempt for the humanities, because the only way I know the humanities is the new way. I don't know the humanities of 1920 or something, right? So I always had not so much respect for students of the humanities when I was at the university for precisely those reasons. They don't respect their classics. They don't know where they're coming from, and they're sloppy and lazy. And
well, even when I was a student, it was largely an artificial path that I set myself on, because I kind of grew up in that atmosphere where that was kind of important. Most of my audience knows, my father's Hungarian, and even though he became very Americanized, there were just things that, architecture and history of Europe, and I don't know, so I said, I need to do this, for no other reason than to understand where this all came from. In a historical sense. But I think even in the 90s, people didn't really care about it. It was gone already. 1920s, yeah, that would be different. But, part of this, of course, is a consequence that, and this is, I guess, a somewhat controversial view, I just don't think education is for everyone. And when you make it so that education is for everyone, they're going to gravitate to the easiest stuff. I've talked about this in this video, obviously, but the so-called English major in the United States, a person who can't write two coherent sentences, who's read almost nothing of any importance, it's just like a degree with a title on it. That's basically all it is. And fortunately for you guys, you can't get away with that in physics. You can't dilute physics to the point where anyone can do it.
That's fortunate, indeed.
I know you made a video about Makla recently. But I guess a lot of people don't know that she actually had a background in physics.
Oh yeah.
It's a shame she departed from that and went into politics. She would have done much greater things in physics.
Yeah. On the other hand, I think it's also good that natural scientists become involved in politics. I mean, I don't mean that in the case of Merkel directly, but we cannot leave the field of politics to only, it used to be lawyers, and I think lawyers should be there, because when you make laws, you should know the law, of course. We will always need lawyers or judges or something in politics also, but then there are a lot of these failed, half-baked academics, these, like Joschka Fischer I think he never went to university or was a dropout, and then he was a cab driver and a complete left-wing communist ideologue, a complete idiot. And he became the foreign minister of Germany. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are somewhere in the humanities, social studies, whatever, and they maybe they didn't even finish their degrees. They never worked a day in actual science or in the free market, and we cannot leave politics, the field of politics, to people like that. So I wish that more engineers or scientists would actually consider that.
As you've pointed out in this discussion, I mean, being a physicist doesn't make you immune to being human, and we've seen this with Merkel. I mean,
in no way. I'm not.
I don't know
saying
anything
that,
about her work as a scientist, but clearly it
on
didn't have
spectrum.
a
Yeah.
positive impact on her
Yeah.
policies.
Yeah. So of course, I mean, being a physicist doesn't make you a sound mind person automatically. But I'm just saying that if politics becomes an echo chamber of social studies, English major, SJW types, that will not be a good thing for any country.
No, I agree with that, but I don't know. Politicians, they're just. I think whatever field or background they come from, they're just kind of all the same at the end of the day. They lie to get votes. I don't think too highly of politicians, needless to say. But yeah, I agree with that. It'd be nice to have more diverse politicians with a more diverse, I guess, intellectual background. But in the case of Merkel, I don't really know. It's strange.
Who knows what she really is?
Well, I didn't realize there were all these theories when you made that video about Merkel. It's like,
oh yeah,
she's a CIA plant. She's a Jew plant. She's a Russian plant. She's I had to look some of this up, but apparently a lot of people believe this stuff.
Yeah, because she is basically not revealing anything. And I can understand that could have very trivial reasons, but in that case, when you're such an important person, when you have so much impact, and your past is somewhat murky, and there are some open questions there, and people, I mean, don't really have a good idea of where you're coming from and what you stand for, then of course they start just making up stuff.
Yeah, well, look, the internet has no shortage of conspiracy theorists, and people who are just absolutely certain that.
Yeah, but they can't all be correct at the same time.
Well, that's the thing. One of them has to be correct. I mean,
one of them might be correct, or none of them.
Or none.
But
yeah,
they can't all be right.
Yeah. Well, that's why the most passionate conspiracy theorists are the ones who they just know.
Yeah.
How do you know this? I just know.
Yeah.
But how? What's the? I just know. Didn't you see this?
Yeah,
I mean, like what happened in Westminster recently, right? Every time something like that happens, it's a psyop. Well, I'm not saying that, but there's always going to be somebody who comes on and say it's clearly a false flag operation.
Yeah, to make us look
whatever.
bad. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, there are different flavors of that. There's the New World Order. The New World Order is a really abstract one. I don't really know what people mean by that. There's the classic, the Jews are like Merkel is a secret Jew or something.
Yeah.
There's one that I think is much more recent. Is this everyone's a CIA agent? That's another one that's been. I think I don't remember that 10 years ago as much as I see it these days. That everyone is a CIA agent.
Yeah, well, I think that just reflects the fears or the sentiments of the population towards certain ideas or groups. In many ways.
Yeah. I mean, it can't be that just Merkel's history is her history, and she made some shitty political decisions. It's Occam's razor, basically. It can't be that. It's I don't know. I thought it was a good video, but there's no shortage of theories that would contest some of the stuff that you talked about in that.
I hope I have the time to release the other ones soon. So that's just the beginning of the series.
Well, if you're not too old, you might still have time.
Yeah, I mean, I meant, of course I will do that at some point, but I hope it doesn't take too long.
Ja. Die Zeit hat mir mein ganzes Leben geraubt.
Yeah. So you mean the newspaper or the concept of time?
Ne, ich meine die Zeit. Also, ja. Sein und Zeit. Yeah, pretty much. Anyway, but I think we've kind of covered all the basics, and I'd like to get Red Pill on in the future regarding some German things. Well, before I forget, anyway, I showed you that article, totally unrelated to what we talk about, but this might be of interest to the MGTOW audience. So I shared an article. That was the site, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, wow. What a coincidence. I was talking about the site, like the Time site, but in any event, of this, it was such a strangely written article. So it's basically about prostitution, and this guy going into details about some friend he had growing up, or maybe not growing up, but a friend he had who had troubles with the ladies, and eventually he just decides to visit a prostitute, and he has fun and like smile on his face, and he says how great an injustice it was that he wasn't attractive and awkward and all these things. And you'd think, based on the tone of the article, that he's going to say, well, I guess prostitution does serve a function. No, instead, a couple of sentences or paragraphs later, he's going on about, we have to stop people like him from visiting prostitutes, make it illegal, and it's very strange. Very strange article. It's a good example of white knighterry, or as we say in German, Fotzenknechtismus.
Yeah, das ist ein gutes Wort. Yeah. So I think the author wanted to promote the Swedish model, where
the Nordic model,
women are free. Yeah, the Nordic model. The women are free to sell their bodies to whoever they like, but basically the men who buy their services, they would go to jail or be fined or be punished.
Yeah, which would make you question it, because eventually men would stop going if well, maybe not entirely, but I mean, certainly the risks would prevent a lot of people from going.
Yeah, the author then mentioned also Thailand and stuff like that. So do you make it illegal for people who visited prostitutes to fly to Thailand then, or I don't know.
Yeah.
And how would that be the other way around? Like, what if a woman buys frequents a male prostitute, or
well, you get a lot of these kind of over the hill, past the wall women who visit places like Jamaica.
Oh yeah,
looking for the BBC, and so I mean, nobody's making an issue out of that, I guess, because women are doing it. I don't know. Strange. It's not really strange. I guess we're all used to it by now. But I just thought it was significant because of the sort of transition. You saw it in tone, like, oh, and it was unfair, and you think the author was about to say, yeah, I guess prostitution is useful or whatever. No, instead no, we must stop him. Don't let people like my friend go to see prostitutes.
Yeah, so he wanted to say basically that this friend is not breaking any laws, and he doesn't feel like he's doing a bad thing, but in fact he is promoting human trafficking and forced prostitution and stuff. But what he is advocating for, I think, will never be successful in Germany, and you saw that in the comment section under the video. Even on a SJW outlet like Die Zeit, the commenters were very critical of the author and the article, actually, because sex workers in Germany are organized in I think Hydra is the name of the organization, and they have insurance now, and they are really fighting for being seen as just quote unquote normal workers, that this is a normal job, and they have a union and all that stuff. And the business is so big, I do not see really how this could be in the near future be kind of made illegal, or
yeah, it's
I think the sex workers themselves would basically be up in arms about that, so they would just shut down all these initiatives that would try to make it illegal for their customers to come to them. They have no interest in making it illegal for their best customers to come and spend a shit ton of money for 1 hour of their time.
Yeah, they definitely want to make the money, and that would be the incentive for them to oppose measures like that.
I mean, compared to working in the factory, it's easy money. A
man
has to work a month for what these women make on a weekend. So.
Yeah, definitely. Well, anyway, that was a bit of news from Germany and some shitty article from Die Zeit. Well, actually, so Die Zeit hat mir auch mein Leben geraubt. Also
mein Verstand.
beide Zeiten.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So everyone, thanks for tuning in. It was pretty cool to talk about the perception of physics and just how that interacts with the public and just really how different it is when compared to, say, biology. Um, Obviously, because biology concerns us directly, although I would argue physics concerns us directly too. I mean, physics is the basics of chemistry and biology, but very interesting to have our guest on, Red Pill Chemist. I would encourage him, or I'd encourage you to sub to his channel if you haven't done so already. He's been pretty consistent recently with the uploads. I think in part due to the fact that he has more time, but definitely check him out. And I hope in the future to see some actual proper physics videos, because I'm sure some people, I certainly would be interested in. Some other people would be interested as well, because there's not enough of that out there. You know, the science that's out there as a final note on a final note is it's just sort of this, oh, science is cool, let me learn a fact or two kind of thing. It never really is that sort of, we need a solid basis of knowledge. It's, oh, science is cool. The science is a cool crowd is also the sort of SJW crowd, generally
I hate
speaking.
those people.
Overlap.
But
Yeah.
when I'm retired, I might think about making such a video series, or I would need a big time out from work to do that, because if I would do that, that would be a lot of work. That would be a lot of
Yeah.
work.
No, I get it. But and check his channel out anyway. Talks a lot about some of the contemporary issues. Recent video on Malco was quite good. And just see the amount of conspiracy theories or just theories about her, about who she is, where she came from, who she's working for, etc. I would say going into that video, just going with Occam's razor, and you should be fine. Everyone, thanks for tuning in on this Saturday. No, this is not April Fool's. I don't do that sort of thing, although apparently a lot of people do. Not really my thing, but let's all thank Red Pill Germany, and all of you head over to his channel and subscribe. And until the next time, which might be quite soon, I will check you out later. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.